воно активується. Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Tamanova, and it's my pleasure to welcome you at Ukraine Media Center today. Today we have invited you to discuss the internal challenges in Ukraine and the global geopolitical trends in the light of those events unfolding right in front of our eyes. So let's discuss information warfare. We will be also discussing Russian Federation, United States, China, and the countries of European Union. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us in the studio today are Vadym Denysenko, political expert, Ihar Tyshkevich, political analyst, and also joining us is Iliya Kusa, international relations expert. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. So now we are facing the following phase of negotiations based on what President Trump is saying. Tomorrow, another conversation between the United States and Putin is about to happen. So in the eve of those events, we've seen all those summaries of the negotiations in Jeddah, and we've seen the reaction of pro-Russian media, Russian propaganda media. We've seen the reaction on part of the bloggers. So if we describe it in general, they were all saying that the conditions are unacceptable for the Russian Federation. So I would like to ask your opinion. Would Putin agree to the ceasefire? What will be the factors that would influence his decision? The floor is yours. Okay, thank you. Let me start then. Let me start from the level of the global policy. Now, when it comes to the factors that will influence such decisions, and I think my colleagues will be able to complement me on part of Russia and regional countries that are involved in this process. Well, the President of the United States is moving within his logic that he never betrayed, even despite those bright events unfolding in the Oval Office in Jeddah and in other places elsewhere, and despite those loud statements made by President Trump on different topics, his logic, in my opinion, remains unchanged. This logic is unchanged for the United States. It has been unchanged within the last 20 years, starting from the times of Barack Obama administration. Since then, the United States were trying to change, to adapt to the global challenges that, in their opinion, are of threat to their dominating position in the world. They're trying to achieve it, first of all, by reindustrialization and reformatting of their own economy, because they realized that there was a moment when their economy, their industry has achieved a point at which they were unable to win the competition, were unable to preserve the leadership. So in order to transform it all, they need to revert to the economic nationalism. And this is what they've started doing. And in my opinion, it started back in Obama era, and now Trump is doing it just in a more of a brighter manner than his predecessors did. And now the transition from hegemony to leadership, in fact, the United States want to decrease the spending on their global presence, to rethink their global presence, since it's way easier for them to maintain the leadership in some key areas that would ensure their place in the system of global relations, rather than claiming the global domination, which is difficult in the modern world. Now it's even counterproductive in the presence of other powerful countries in the world. So they try to cut the spending where they are not of priority anymore, and they try to focus their resources on the internal development and on vital areas. And third is an attempt to renegotiated with other key players in the system of international relations who, one way or another, are challenging the global order depending on their desires or interests, and it applies to old players like Russian Federation as a successor of the Soviet Union. China is now grown up enough to challenge the United States, as well as the new countries such as middle powers, as they are called, the middle countries who possess sufficient resources to at least claim the regional or interregional or sub-regional leadership, and with whom you have to agree it again, because within the last 15 to 20 years, they have been demonstrating that they can challenge the United States in a number of regions. It applies to Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and others. And some countries which are traditionally considered to be a part of the so-called West in the post-war understanding of the world, I mean South Korea and Japan, in certain sense, they want to get a bigger role in the system of international relations. And I don't want to say they're challenging the United States, but they would also like to be more autonomous in terms of their internal policy, their foreign policy, and within the system of international security. And it all resulted in United States policy turnaround in terms of the policy that was formulated after the World War III. And Donald Trump is the guide of this policy. The only thing that has changed is the style. He has changed the style. His public rhetoric has changed. He talks about those things more openly. He has a set of ideas how to achieve it better, and he is trying to use different approaches, unlike Joe Biden, who was trying to build that policy based on the multilateral alliances, partnerships, relying upon the existing international organizations to the extent possible. Donald Trump, right on contrary, thinks that the international organizations are not worth a lot of attention. Multilateral institutions are way too complex. And what's really necessary is to rely upon the bilateral diplomacy, one-on-one, where United States have any advantage over any country of the world. Their weight defines it. So this is what determines his approach to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and his attempt to identify the parties, to identify himself as a mediator, to make everybody sit at the negotiations table, and United States to get some reputational status, relevant reputational status, after the end of the war or the agreement on the ceasefire. In this situation, when the United States, on one hand, well, I've explained it from the perspective of their interest. It's clear that the turnaround by the United States is in contradiction to the interests of other countries which were not ready to that, like European countries, some of them, or otherwise didn't want such a quick turnaround or never thought this turnaround would ever happen, never believed so. But still, Europe ended up in a difficult condition because on one hand, first of all, for some countries, it has become quite unexpected. For other countries, they are only just now starting to think about what's going on, and Europe ended up in front of a dilemma in this global game when in fact the turnaround of the United States results in the destruction of the post-war security architecture, which was based on a simple principle. Europe was developing, investing minimum into their defense and security, and in the logic of the Cold War, the leadership belongs to the United States, and the American security umbrella was the foundation of the European security architecture. After the year 1991, the system started crumbling. Russia was an enemy to someone, but not so much anymore to the others. And now when the United States have made this turnaround and the election of Donald Trump expedited those events, Europe is facing the necessity to undertake the final decision. Either they try to wait without doing anything, hoping that United States would be back to normality, or they are getting subjectivized through internal transformations. So all those processes are being reflected on Ukraine because one way or another we are a part of European security architecture. It's not even about the integration to NATO. It's a matter of European policy and reformation of the security system that would depend on our war as well. That's why on a global level, in my opinion, despite all those bright pictures, all those statements, someone is getting shocked about them. It's clear, but again, everything is developing according to the logic that was in fact chosen by the United States. Say the discussions about it have started in the end of 80s, but maybe they finally made their choice in the middle of the 2000s when it became clear that Chinese economy started catching up or even outspeeding the American one. So that was the point where this turnaround had started, and now we're living on a peak when everything is unfolding right in front of our eyes, and the whole system of international relations, including all of the standards, red lines, norms, loses its actuality, and it creates as opportunities for many countries as well as risks that we're experiencing in such a painful manner when some unfathomable things are happening around us. What's also interesting is that it all has the consequences in the European arena and on the level below when we consider all that amount of factors of the regional and sub-regional nature that influence the situation, and Ihar may tell you more about it. Yes, Mr. Ihar, the floor is yours. Yeah, let me add. Quite a good remark was that the whole system of international relations is getting obsolete, and in my opinion, how Trump is different from his predecessors. He recognizes it. It means that the logic is changing. You either work in the old system trying to transform it, or you don't think of it as of a value, and you build your logic based on the multipolar world. And what's illustrative here is that it's the consequences of the old policies. There are new players emerging, and the United States are were betting on the old coalition who were adhering to the United States interests. Like Ihor mentioned the situation in the Europe, but let's think from the logical perspective. If it's not a conflict between United States and Russia, but say between United States and China, would the matter of European security remain a priority, or would the regional coalition in Asia become a priority because they are closer, just banally closer? So from the perspective of that harsh rhetoric on the European axis, it looks logical. On the other hand, it also looks logical when the old system is being destroyed. The middle powers, such as Turkey, who emerged, they are trying, since there are no one to protect them, they're trying to find their place under the sun and to create their zone of influence. We can recall Syria, Caucasus in that context, but there is yet another illustrative thing that, in my opinion, was not quite properly covered when, after the failure in the Oval Office, there was a summit of European countries who agreed to support Ukraine, and Turkey was a part of this summit. They were taking part, and they've demonstrated that they're taking side, not because they love Ukraine. If the agreement follows in the Trump's logic, and they would try to use Russian Federation as a counterweight to the Chinese Republic, it would it would interfere with Turkey interests in the domination in the Black Sea, domination in the energy market, and reconstruction or competition for reconstruction of logistic ways. We can recall the Turkish statements about Iraq development project that can continue all the way to Ukraine. Again, it's logical, and the initiatives of the United States, they are also challenging the old allies, because when there was the most intense jeopardization of Ukrainian-American relations, I mean in public, I was remaining optimistic, because a demonstrative turnaround by the United States of America was resulting in a lot of questions whether the Asian allies should continue relying upon the United States. It was the biggest threat to the interest of the United States in terms of their competition with China. But when it comes to Europe, European countries, yes, really, in Europe, we are very likely to see another attempt of creation of the regional coalition in Eastern Europe, like Baltic countries, probably Romania, Poland, with Polish attempts of domination as the projection of American presence. That was a format that was conceived even before to balance it, and with the relevant influence of Germany and Russian Federation, it's valuable for Ukraine, because it's easier to talk to those countries. They understand us better. But at the same time, if such project gets any momentum, gets any development, it will be a challenge for Europe, because Europe has a number of postponed problems or a number of crises that were not being paid relevant attention, like the technological leap. United States and China, they try to localize the technologies in their countries, but what was the part of European countries? Not like separate European countries, but European Union as a union. So we have to find an answer to this question, and this answer should be continuing as a changes in policies in research and development sector with the United States and other countries, in industrial policies, and so on and so forth. Another dimension is political dimension. If the security umbrella disappears over Europe, another question appears about autonomization of European policies, so that European Union as one becomes more separate, more independent on those frameworks set by the United States. But you can only autonomize using the resources. And the problem of European Union is that it was a structure that was built according to the old standards, which the United States don't recognize as normal anymore, which means that more resources should be found, not only human and industrial, even including ideological resources. It also stimulates the talks about transformation of European Union. Let's recall those European ideas that used to sound before. We have a crisis of the creation of regional alliance, the crisis of rethinking of their future, and another crisis of attempts of transformation inside of the European Union, which overlap one another. That's yet another challenge for all those states. But on the other hand, is something that Russia sees, and they want to play on it. They will try to play on it. They're entering the media space quite actively, even despite the war. Just an easy example. A simple example. Look, the budget of Moscow region, St. Petersburg, and its region, when it comes to allocation of funds to soft power, according to the average rate of dollar, about $1.2 billion are about to be allocated in Africa and Asia, and Russia will try to play in the ideological field because it's convenient for them. For Russian Federation, it's impossible to withdraw from the war in Ukraine just in the format of armistice or truce. Russian Federation needs, and here I'm repeating myself when Putin is saying that it's the war for the future of Russia. They need a picture of foreign relations victory. They need to document some concessions on part of the European Union or NATO, but something outside Ukraine. And on top of the picture of the victory in the battlefield in Ukraine, what else can Russian propaganda draw? That's why, yes, obviously so, the PSYOPs attempts of political influence are going to intensify, and the year 2025 is already becoming, and it will become even more intense in terms of attempts to use the political influence over the old institutions as well as on the processes of formation of new coalitions and players around Ukraine. Again, it's an attempt to renew the policy on Turkey, attempt to renew the policy on the Eastern and Western Europe. What's interesting is the attempt to update their policy on the China, on the Chinese government, because their dependency on China is growing. So Russia is trying to pull China into negotiation process or consultations on their side, including blackmail and such as problems with the transit of double-purpose goods through the territory of Russian Federation. On the other hand, when it comes to China, for Beijing, the Trump's policy is important. It's beneficial to them. I mean, look at the Beijing's reaction to the meltdown in the Oval Office and the attempts of the blackmailing by European states. They've sent a signal to those states who are between those potential blocs. Like, look, those who are disappointed in the United States policies, look at the China as a reliable partner. So again, this time of disruption of international world, of international order, China will try to play their role to demonstrate themselves as a factor of the soft power, of the stabilizing force. And in this understanding, the influence over the coalitions and the building of ties with those coalitions is a key priority to China. I think many organizations will be transformed into pro-Chinese organizations. There will be attempts to intensify the activities in Caucasus through Turkey, and how Ukraine can use it is or what Ukraine can use is the competition between Turkey and Russian Federation in such region as Armenia in case of peace agreement with Azerbaijan. And another problem will arise, the problem of cooperation with Belarus, Poland, Germany, or Romania, Poland, and other countries. And it's all happening around Ukraine. So those factors, on one hand, are creating opportunities for future settlement, but it's not about the settlement itself. The question is when. For Beijing, it's important to start the settlement after the United States recognize that it's impossible to solve any problem without Beijing.
Mr. Vadym, I would like to ask about, what, in your opinion, will Putin agree to the ceasefire? A lot of people are saying that the development will be so that Putin will not be able not to agree to this proposition, but at the same time, at some technical stage, we will be having some kind of delays that how exactly, in your opinion, the events around this ceasefire could develop? Well, as of now, we don't even understand yet if this kind of conversation will take place. In my opinion, I think there will be some kind of positive side to these negotiations. And right now, a first step, first cornerstone that we need to pay attention to. Like, for example, the March will be the month when the last sanctions of Biden will happen in terms of Russian oil. Also, a portion of the Republicans are getting ready to make a statement, a very symptomatic statement. If it turns out that Putin really manipulates Donald Trump, then the U.S. Will have a horrible response, terrible response. And what do these sanctions of Biden mean? These sanctions, in any kind of situation, can decrease export of the Russian oil around 15–20% per year. It's not lethal, but it's quite critical for Russian Federation. Because this will influence the future developments of the situation. Also, it brings serious problems to the Russian Federation finances, financial budget. Also, it ruins somewhat the relationship between Russia and China. Right now, 10 days is what's left in terms of time for Vladimir Putin to decide what his position will be in the future, during the future negotiations. All those things that were mentioned before the negotiations started will be taken, should be, and will be taken into account by the parties. Right now, in the Russian Federation, we need to understand two very important things that concern the mood of the population and mood of the elites. The study shows that around a third of Russian population is supporting the so-called hurrah patriotism, and will be voting for continuation of the current policy of the Russian Federation. Around half of them. They are the core electorate of the Vladimir Putin, and the rest is the people who don't regard Vladimir Putin too highly. Also, there is a small minority. We call them passionate minority that will be very, very active politically, and it could mean huge crowds of people who will be unhappy with the results of the war, of the people returning from the war, and things like this. But they could be very active, and also it needs to be mentioned that around 70 16–17% is a passive minority that are ready to stop, to freeze kind of the current borders, even including the Kursk incursion. However, majority is ready to start peaceful negotiations tomorrow, basically tomorrow. Also, there is elites, Russian elites, that we need to mention. We have identical situation here. Some experts characterized those as five of the apocalypse.
Writers.
So who are those super hawks in the Russian Federation? The five that I mentioned before. This way or another, as much as it may sound surprising, the Russian Federation already started thinking in the logic of transitioning from war to peace. Why Chemezov is against the continuation of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine? He is trying to bring his political group influence to the top. Another group is the Patrushev, who is Putin's aide. He recently kind of lost his status of the overall warden above the law enforcement troops, and he is now seeking to restore his influence. However, the relationship between the two mentioned people is still there, and the third one is the person responsible for the international policy of the Russian Federation, and a very trusted person to the Vladimir Putin. He is 74-year-old right now. He traditionally was anti-hawkish politic. Also, let's add to the mix the brothers Kovalchuk. They do not influence Vladimir Putin too much, but they do play a significant role in the Russian internal politics. And the last one, the last person who is influencing the Russian policy, he is not having enough control over the interior processes in Russian Federation right now. So he is kind of assessing the other four players right now. People who stay behind the Putin tell him that he needs to keep the war going. However, they do not represent the 100% of the elites that will be influencing the decision of Vladimir Putin. So the decision of Vladimir Putin will be relying on the key factor that will decide his decision will be whether it helps him to keep ruling over the Russian Federation. So right now he understands that he did not achieve and probably will not achieve those goals that he put in front of himself in 2008. He thought at the time that a short and a victorious war will help him become a third pole in the world. Also, he believed that he could bring back the total informational control over the space of the former USSR, and he understands all these things clearly. However, on the other hand, he understands he cannot afford a conflict with the current administration of the US, with Donald Trump, namely, which could also he need to balance all the things mentioned with the Chinese influence and well, he can accomplish his goals by the means of making his system even more stable. His vertical of power that he has built, he wants to reinforce it. However, it should be mentioned that Vladimir Putin is not a political person that makes his decisions lightly or quickly. So, however, right now he has got only 10 days left before some kind of substantial decisions will be made, should be made. Right now, we don't see any kind of pushback from the Trump administration against Russia. On the contrary, we see some kind of improvement of their relations. However, I stay an optimist, and I think that he will be trying to delay the time.
We know no decisions are made in Russia without intense propaganda campaigns, the goal of which is to manipulate the public opinion, public sentiment. So, talking about that campaign that unfolded after the first round of negotiations, when everybody was vociferating like how bad it is for Ukraine, are you also thinking that those were the attempts to reinforce their positions on the next phase of negotiations, or were they preparing the society to be loath to accept any of those negotiations? Well, after Jeddah, we see that they were absolutely unready. And what was happening in Russia was a number of statements that were contradicting each other. Well, the Russians always do that. That's what they do. They are generating contradictory statements, but now they are using a number of lines they've generated. Talking about Ukraine, the key line is that it's about President Zelensky, that Zelensky should be removed, and it will result in peace, and the negotiations will then go smooth and calm. So that's the first narrative they're implementing, and they will continue to develop it. Then another line, they will try to disturb the topic of Iran and North Korea. So they will be basically trading the air. The fact that they will try to speculate on the topic that they will be able to pacify Iran and North Korea, and Ukraine will be put aside. So definitely they will continue pushing on the painful spots such as corruption in Ukraine, corruption scandals in Ukraine. Have no doubt about the future scandals on that topic to unfold in Ukraine further on. But for the time being, they have not found an answer to the key question, starting from the November 2024, the main narrative was that Russia was a peaceful country. Russia was a peaceful country who wanted peace, and an evil marionette. Ukraine doesn't want peace because it's being puppeted by a United States and Europe. Jeddah broke it all. They have no answer what to do about it. That's why they're throwing in a lot of information, just stupidities, provocations, psyops. And we were discussing it with my colleagues right before this conference. It doesn't only originate from Russian publics, but for the time being, when it comes to Ukrainian and Western market, it also originates a lot from, I don't like this expression, but right radical American publics and media. Well, I would also like to add that there is no single vision, as Vadym mentioned. Yeah, the result of Ukrainian-American negotiations is disliked by Russia. They really hate it. I mean, in the view of all those statements they are making. But on the other part, on a strategic level, the Russian Federation, in their propaganda, they are removing the United States from the list of the worst warriors. Like, there is a bad result in Saudi Arabia, but there is separate Trump with whom we can negotiate something. And it leaves some space for maneuver for Russia to say, like, yeah, we could agree it with Trump. We could agree it in terms of Iran, or we can agree on some economic topics like gas, Arctic, and stuff like that. Well, they will be suggesting this stuff to Russia. Well, Vadym, you've mentioned that Putin will be likely to agree to the 30-day armistice, 30-day ceasefire, and it will result in pause that Russia will try to use to their advantage. In your opinion, how can Russia use that pause? Well, I've said that there is a more than 50% probability, but again, talking about the pause, the key point is that there will be attempt to do three things. First thing that is very underestimated in Ukraine is everything that was signed in Ariad. So what was signed there? Everybody keeps saying that, well, or that was discussed in Ariad, not signed. Well, in Ariad, it was suggested that the American companies get back to mining in Russia and they get access to the joint operations in Arctic region. Another thing not so much mentioned by everybody is that the Russians offered to the Americans to create a system for sale of those resources, and not only those resources. I think that it was about the sanctioned diamonds, sanctioned lumber, and other stuff under sanctions. So what are they saying? Like, let's create, like, if you recall the times of Viktor Yushchenko, there was such a company, Rosukrenergo. So they suggest to create the so-called USA Russia Energo in the European market and in the markets of so-called unfriendly countries. If we just simplify it, they want to establish an intermediary trade house that sells the jointly generated American-Russian product, but it would be an American company who sells those products in relevant territories. Well, it's about tens of billions of dollars today. The opportunity to make tens of billions of dollars today is one of the biggest challenges because it perfectly fits in the economic deal that is so intensely discussed by the American party. Then the Russians will attempt to trade Ukraine in a lot of chessboards. I've already mentioned Iran and North Korea. I'm confident that they will start offering something in Africa and, first of all, in Sahel countries. I'm confident they will try to offer something in South America. And third thing that needs mentioning is the disruption or attempts of disruption in the territory of Ukraine through a number of tools. Like, they need chaos in Ukraine. Like, there are talks that they will bet on somebody on Ukraine, but what they will really bet on is chaos. They will try to disrupt the situation not only in territory of Ukraine, and we have to be ready to that. Those are the three main items to remember. What I would also like to add, that there is a perspective of internal Ukrainian process. Even 30-day ceasefire puts the topic of war aside, and if it's put aside, we're getting back to the conditional situation of anti-terroristic operation dating 2017, when there was Donbass and there was peaceful life in other parts of Ukraine. But we will be getting back to the worst iteration of that condition. Again, they're gonna rock the boat with corruption, political issues, and other stuff. We see the political struggles starting in Ukraine now, and Ukraine starts living in that format when there is no 30-day ceasefire. but it would look rather as a long-lasting peace process. And what's on is Minsk process, consultations with Russian Federation and stuff alike. So this is what Russia bets on in all of the post-Soviet countries. They don't bet on disintegration of political power. They bet on a slow and gradual transformation of the political authorities in the opponent countries. But again, our information space is open for Russian influence, and the Russians are gonna rock the situation. We have to be ready. We have to prepare. It's not only about fighting fakes. It's a matter of full transformation of information policy of the state. Well, I think that in many aspects, the motivation of Russia is to either agree or not to agree for 30-day ceasefire or any other initiatives of the United States in Ukrainian track, and it will depend on the extent to which the United States and Russia have the broad agreements on the global level. We cannot assert. We don't know a lot, actually. There are only statements made by the representatives of both parties, but the statements are one thing. The whole different thing is to do some practical things. There are no practical things so far. If potential broad agreements on cooperation on the global level will be confirmed, will be verified, it will be a motivation for Russia to continue the ceasefire if that time can be used for bringing themselves closer to the United States in those points of contact, in those points of common interest. Within the last couple of months, there was a coverage of such events in the media. For example, the resource agreement between the potential resource agreement between Russia and the United States that Vadym has mentioned. Also, the Americans and the Russians were mentioning the joint projects on mining in Arctic region, where they have interest and where they have presence, given the plans of the Trump's administration for Greenland. I don't know how are they unfolding, but they are still talking about that. The potential cooperation in the Middle East, it never ceased. And moreover, I see that the United States consider Russia as a potential partner in Middle Eastern affairs. They don't mind the Russian military bases to remain in Syria. At least they never set any strict terms for the new Syrian authorities to remove those bases. Recently, the administration of Trump inflicted strikes on the Yemen Houthis, who resumed their attacks on the Israeli navigation. And before that strike, Marco Rubio, the state secretary, called Sergei Lavrov, and they had a conversation on Middle Eastern region. And based on that, we can assert that the United States consider Russia as a potential communicator with the Yemen Houthis. However, they cannot talk to Iran as the biggest donor of Houthis. And it's not a secret that a couple of days ago, the United States asked Russians to be mediators in their negotiations with Iran on Iranian nuclear program. So again, a lot will depend on the extent to which Iranians will be happy to face this solution, because they mistrust the Russian mediation. But it all demonstrates that the United States, at least at the level of the Trump's administration, trust that Russia can be at least a situational partner in solution of a number of global tasks related to global security, not only Ukraine, not only European security, but something that happens on different continents. I'm not going to be surprised if there will be news given the fact that the United States have announced that they are about to cut the spending for the African Command that deals with the operations in Africa. So I think they can reach mutual understanding with Russia, who can act as a fixer for a number of local problems. So depending on whether what exists now are not only the speculations, but something that would transform into practical agreements, practical contracts, so then we can safely state that Russians' motivation would be not to break the ceasefire and to continue agreeing. I mean, again, from the perspective of the Russians, is there way to become the third pole of the world? How can they become it? They need to be appreciated in the global dimensions. They can become a partner in those issues that are not directly related to their national security. And if they see progress in that field in the way that they see it, I think it should be sufficient for them. I would urge you to pay attention to those things to understand to what extent the Americans believe that Russians can be their partner, and to what extent Russians believe that the United States are being honest, because there is still distrust between them. I mean, within the last month, they haven't become friends. So there is still mistrust, and this is why the dialogue is so slow and gradual. Thank you very much. I would like to pass the microphone to the floor. Dear friends, dear colleagues, if you have any questions on the floor, please raise your hands and ask your questions.
Very interesting. Lorenzo Cremonesi of Corriere della Sera would have 1 million questions, but I will try to limit to three questions. The first one is to Mr. Iliya. In Italy, we have a big debate. I'm writing for the Corriere della Sera, which is a major Italian daily, and there are many people who are talking like you. They're saying, you know, but we don't have to be worried about Trump because it's, you know, following, first of all, it's what you said, it's from Trump, from Obama. Already America is telling to the European friends, ally, we cannot go on like this, you have to pay your part, it's too expensive, the Cold War is over, you have to be part of it, okay. But if you look at the Middle East, who Trump is choosing, the extreme Israeli right. I would take the Middle East, I've been there for 25 years, so I know quite well this area, but, you know, he is, how can I say, dressing is very rightist policy in supporting the extreme Israeli right, the settlers, the idea of transfer of Nakba, as the Palestinians say, or expelling Palestinians. Look at the Gaza plan. It looks like nice. We will do a beach, a beautiful resort. But this is exactly what the Israeli right is saying from Jabotinsky, from the 30s. You have to expel the Palestinians. So it looks like a very commercial, nice idea, but in effect it's a very ideological one. He's not saying put the Palestinian in Nablus or in Tel Aviv. No, he's saying expel them. That's exactly the position of the right. Look at here. He's coming here and he says, he's not saying let's talk with Putin. No, he's saying you, Mr. Zelensky, you are responsible, etc. So don't you think that in effect this, you know, kind of mercantilistic, put it, very practical, businessman-like approach of Trump is in effect very much connected with a big ideological plan, which is very ideological, which is, you know, dividing the country, as people say, is 18th century policy, 19th century policy, big imperialistic plan, no international organization, no UN, no international tribunal, nothing, no Europe, which is very tedious. Let's play the war, Putin, me, and Xi. And that's it, which I found it very, very crazy. And this is the first question. Sorry, it was a bit long, but in order to explain. Secondly, it's interesting because you all didn't mention much about Europe, which I know is not very important, but it's interesting to hear a bit about Europe. And also the European policy, the Ukrainian policy. I didn't hear much what Mr. And that's my question that I pose to everybody. Do you think that the catastrophe, let me say, of the 28th of February was a real mistake? As many people say here, I spoke with very pro-Zelensky people are saying Zelensky made a terrible mistake. The first 30 minutes of the meeting was not so bad. The day before, Mr. Trump even said that he didn't say what he says. I mean, everything was more, and then he ruined everything. And if this is true, then it's really possible to recover America, or America is lost. And if America is lost because it's already thinking in another era, and it's talking about dividing the world, and it doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. It doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. Then can Europe, and this is the third question, can Europe really do something? Because Mr. Zelensky, I remind you that since September at the meeting at the United Nations, he said for the first time, Europe, Europe, Europe. He never said that. He always said that we cannot win the war without Europe. And now he's really is welcome like a new European hero, defender on the trenches of Europe. So can Europe, because Mr. Zelensky till yesterday just said, without America, we lost the war. We are lost, that's it. So can Europe replace somehow? Thank you.
Хто візьме?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I don't really think that Trump's administration, their policy, is an imperial kind of policy. I think that the way, well, at least the way I see it, that personally for Donald Trump and for the representatives of his administration, the things that are of value to the people who believe in the liberal world order don't matter for them. I mean, the liberal world order that has been existing within the last 30 years after the Cold War. I mean, it's still a matter of discussion, but still, he demonstrates it with his statements, with his activities, his resolutions. He demonstrates that for him, the rules that were created by foreign institutions as a result of multilateral cooperation of many countries, they are secondary for him. They are not of priority. And as I was saying, that for Donald Trump, he believes that the United States should be building their policy exclusively on bilateral interaction, one-on-one. In his logic, there is no United Nations or European Union or NATO in such interaction. There are no such things like supranational, globalized things. There's a lot of Trump's adherents among the right-wing movements, and they frequently use the term globalists against their enemies, and they do it for a reason. They think that everything that is built on a supranational level, supranational governments are the enemies, because that's something that is contrary to the clear spirit of what the people need, what the nation needs. So in my opinion, Donald Trump in this understanding is the people's president, because he wants to make statements on behalf of the basic interests, some fundamental interests of the American society, without connection to the global things. Well, whether it's right or not, that's a whole different question. I'm not going to give my assessment. I think that the United States are going to make that assessment themselves. But I think that the problem of the Europe is, well, it applies to Ukraine as well, that it was considered within decades that the liberal world order and its elements, with its principles, values, institutions, rules, that this order is forever. That is the story that's never gonna end. That those are the sacral things that no one can destroy. And I think that this is the reason for such a disappointment in the United States. But I don't know. I may make some raw statement. I'm still thinking about it. I think that this turnaround of American policy towards right conservatism will become a disappointment for some countries only, for those for whom it was unfathomable, who could not imagine it. But those countries, those societies that either now or will gradually adapt, or for whom one way or another such turnaround would be beneficial, somebody who favors this turnaround. So for them, the United States will be absolutely normal phenomena. I'm seeing such rifts in Europe already when there are different perceptions of the Trump administration, when some may think that they are ideological people who destroy things, but there are other positions claiming that the Trump administration is the product of their era and they're just the result of internal transformations within the United States. So I think that this is more of a matter directly depending on the perception of the reality by different people within the last 30 years. The idea of the liberal world order, no matter how paradoxical it may sound, but it was born during the times of Ronald Reagan, who is example for Donald Trump. So it was the time of Ronald Reagan when they started projecting their global force, and since then, specifically after the year 1991, when the USSR collapsed, this image of the United States as a dominating country was in culmination, and now we're just observing probably the end of that era. And the Trump administration, you know, they both in Europe and in the Middle East, and I'm sure we'll see the same in Latin America, Africa, and elsewhere in Asia Pacific, they're relying upon those countries where they speak the local elites the same language that they are used to speak, the business language, the language of practical agreements, the language of contracts, narrow understanding of national interests, and the resolution of some specific tasks. So they think in categories of realism, pragmatism, practicality. I mean, from the international relations perspective. So basically, what remains secondary are the values, principles, so those things that were having more significance before. Just like I've said in the very beginning, it's a matter of approach. If Joe Biden's approach was different, but still they're solving the same tasks, it's just that Trump's approach is such when one category has supplanted another category, and the things that are clearer and more understandable for him came to the first plane. I mean, we call it the right conservative government, but for them, they are ideologically close, like they speak the same language. But honestly, in my personal opinion, it seems like it's not so important for Donald Trump what ideology the governing party in this or that country confesses, but it's rather the matter of what they're saying. I see no problem for Trump's administration to cooperate with any party, any country, whether right wing or left wing, if the conversation uses the same language, if they talk about the same interest, if they discuss the same categories. Thank you. Thank you. We have another question. Well, the question about Zelensky and his meeting with Trump, I would say that the logic of the United States communication is changing, and the logic of rationality is changing too. Well, the conflicts are possible, but it's also possible to get back to the negotiations table based on some specific topics. Obviously, the conflict in the Oval Office, it significantly reduced the space for maneuver for Ukraine, but talking about European Union and possible compensation on part of the European Union that is about to replace the American aid. I mean, we have to consider the logic of the United States from domination and global influence to leadership and competition, where there is a number of poles like China, United States, and Russia, but in the opinion of the United States and China, there are only two poles, the United States and China, and Russia, for both of them, is a potentially powerful regional country that can be used in their competition between the two dominating forces. And it's another challenge for Putin, because Washington and Beijing, they will be ready to enter some dialogue to make concessions for Russia in order to improve their positions, not to bring Russia back to the first league. Talking about the compensation of the lacking American aid to Ukraine, well, the European Union as a union, unfortunately, in this matter, I am pessimistic. Again, it's the logic of behavior of the key players, the logic of competition when international organizations are considered to be an obstacle. And European Union is the product of the post-war global order, is the product that is based on the multilateral agreements, the multilateral institutions, and Trump works on a different track. And respectively for European Union, as for Union, it will be difficult to generate some joint long-term support policy for Ukraine. On the other hand, though, it's the activity of separate countries that, as it was demonstrated after the Oval Office meltdown, and this is what Ukraine is gonna bet on. They're gonna bet on the building of bilateral tracks, where the representatives of European countries are gonna meet Zelensky or other president of Ukraine one-on-one. In the long-term perspective. In the short-term perspective, hardly Europe can compensate, but in the long-term perspective, again, it will depend on the way the European countries will see their policies, because if the biggest geopolitical competitors change their logic to the logic of competition, logic of the force, there is a logic of cooperation, and without their own transformation, Russia will become a resource base for more powerful players. I don't think that there's the perspective that we'll be happy about. I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody, the speakers, the guests who got involved, and I want to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can hold events like this, and we continue keeping track of the events of international importance, and we will continue gathering you to discuss them. So thank you very much, and see you shortly. Glory to Ukraine.